If you love ghost stories, folklore, and all things mysterious, you need to make a trip to Haunted in downtown Tullahoma, Tennessee. Just a short drive from Nashville, this family-owned Gothic shop is filled with the strange, unusual, and downright fascinating. This isn't a big box store full of mass-produced decorations. Haunted specializes in handmade curiosities, Gothic decor, metaphysical supplies, green witchcraft essentials, and unique pieces created by independent artists. Whether you're decorating or just looking for something you won't find anywhere else, Haunted is worth the trip. Visit them on 125 West Lincoln Street in Tullahoma, or shop online at hauntedstore.net. That's right, hauntedstore.net. Haunted, curated for the strange and unusual. Welcome back to Southern Ghost Stories. I'm the American Haunt Historian, Alan Searcy. And I've been asking you guys to leave reviews in Apple Podcasts and Spotify for a while. I'm trying to get to 150 Apple Podcast reviews and 100 in Spotify before October. And I'm seeing a handful of those reviews start to trickle in. And I told you guys I'd review them, I'd read them on the show. So here's one from RDH for Bama. Roll Tide, here you go. I can't go to sleep without hearing a story. I need you to do one daily. Seriously though, great show. So, thank you. Not sure how I feel about that. On one hand, I appreciate the 5-star review and the kind words, but I hope I'm not boring you to sleep. Seriously, I do know that podcasts are a thing for some people who have trouble sleeping. I know there's a whole bunch of them that read nursery rhymes and old stories to put people to sleep. So I guess I'm happy I can help you doze off after a long day if you'd like to listen to the show. Anyway, keep sending in those reviews and I'll read them on the podcast. Are y'all ready for the show? Now, typically, I like to talk about things in the South, or maybe even the Midwest. Well, on occasion, I do branch out and talk about wild stories from places like New York or New Jersey, but I ran across something in England that was just so bizarre, I felt like I had to tell the story. So indulge me, if you will. This one's a whole lot of fun. John Babbacombe Lee is remembered as the man they couldn't hang. But the legend is far stranger than the simple nickname that they gave him. His story's been retold for more than a century as proof of divine intervention, a flaw in the justice system, or even something supernatural. Depending on who you ask, Lee was either an innocent man spared by fate, a guilty killer saved by impossible mechanical failure, or the central figure in one of Victorian England's greatest mysteries. Tonight we're traveling back to Devon in the late 19th century, where a gruesome murder, a controversial trial, and an execution that simply refused to happen created a story that still fascinates historians today. John Babbacombe Lee was born in 1864 in Devon, England, he had a poor working-class family. Like countless young men of his generation, he left home early to find work wherever he could. He eventually joined the Royal Navy, hoping military service would provide a much better future. But his career was cut short after an injury forced him to leave the service. Returning to Devon with few prospects, Lee struggled to establish himself. He drifted between jobs before finding employment as a footman and a servant for an elderly, wealthy spinster named Emma Keese. She lived alone at the Glen, a respectable house in Babbacombe, attended by only a handful of servants. It seemed like the sort of quiet household where nothing remarkable ever happened. But Lee's employment didn't last. He was dismissed after accusations of petty theft, though the circumstances remain unclear. Some accounts suggest he was treated harshly, while others insist he had developed a reputation for being dishonest. Whatever the truth, he eventually served a short prison sentence for stealing from another employer before Miss Keese unexpectedly hired him back after his release. It was a surprising decision. Whether she believed he deserved another shot or simply needed somebody to help around the house is not really known, but it placed Lee back inside the home where history would soon take a terrible, terrible turn. The morning of November 15, 1884 began with smoke pouring from the Glen. Fire had broken out inside the house during the night. Servants rushed to the building trying to figure out what had happened, only to discover an even more horrifying sight. Emma Keese lay dead. Her throat had been cut so deeply that she had nearly been decapitated. The killer had also attempted to burn the house, apparently hoping the fire would destroy evidence and make their murder appear accidental. Instead, the flames were extinguished before they consumed the building, preserving a grisly crime scene that shocked Victorian England. And suspicion immediately settled on John Lee. He had been inside the house that night. He was one of the few men with access to the property. His previous conviction hung over him like a dark cloud, making him an easy target for investigators looking for a suspect. There were no eyewitnesses to the murder, no confession, no murder weapon found in his possession. The case against him was almost entirely circumstantial. Authorities pointed to inconsistent statements, his criminal past, and what they interpreted as suspicious behavior following the discovery of her body. In an era long before DNA, fingerprints were not yet accepted as forensic evidence in Britain, and police often relied on assumptions that would seem dangerously thin by today's standards. Lee insisted he was innocent as soon as he was arrested. During question, he calmly denied any involvement. He claimed he had slept through the night and knew nothing about the murder until the household was awakened by the fire. But his protest carried little weight. Victorian juries often viewed previous offenders with deep suspicion, and newspapers quickly portrayed Lee as exactly the kind of servant capable of turning on his wealthy employer. Public opinion hardened long before the trial even started. When Lee appeared before the court, prosecutors painted him as a resentful servant who wanted revenge. They argued that after his previous dismissal and imprisonment, bitterness had grown until it finally exploded into violence. Defense attorneys tried to point out the weaknesses in the evidence. There is no direct proof placing Lee at the murder itself. No witness, nobody had seen him commit the crime. Much of the prosecution's case depended upon convincing jurors that no one else could have done it. Today, that might leave reasonable doubt. In 1885, it was enough to secure a conviction. The jury deliberated for barely an hour before returning with a guilty verdict. The judge sentenced John Lee to death by hanging. And like countless condemned prisoners before him, he was transferred to Exeter Prison to await execution. As the days passed, Lee continued insisting he was innocent. Fellow prisoners later recalled that he remained unusually calm. He spent much of his time reading scripture, praying, and preparing himself for death. And whether that calm reflected genuine faith or simple resignation, no one really knows. But everyone expected the execution to proceed without incident. No one imagined they were about to witness one of the strangest mornings in British legal history. February 25th, 1885, dawned cold and overcast over the prison. And long before sunrise, the prison was already awake. Executions followed a rigid schedule, with every minute carefully planned to avoid mistakes or unnecessary delays. The governor, prison doctor, chaplain, and executioner James Barry, and several officials gathered to oversee the final preparations. Barry was one of Britain's most experienced executioners and had already carried out dozens of hangings. He approached the morning with detached precision of a craftsman. Nothing was left to chance. Inside the execution shed, Barry carefully inspected the gallows one final time. The rope had been selected, stretched beforehand to reduce recoil, and measured according to Lee's height and weight to ensure what was supposed to be a quick death by a broken neck. The knot was positioned behind the left ear, exactly where it needed to be. The trapdoor hinges were checked, the release mechanism lubricated, and the lever tested a handful of times. Each time the executioner threw the lever, the heavy wooden doors beneath the platform swung open instantly. They tested the mechanism again and again until everyone present was convinced it would function flawlessly. Satisfied, the trap was reset for the execution. Meanwhile, in his condemned cell, John Lee had spent the night under constant watch. Like all condemned prisoners, he had not been left alone. A warder remained nearby throughout the night while the prison chaplain prayed with him and offered what little comfort he could. And Lee reportedly slept very little. He read passages from his Bible, spoke quietly with the chaplain, and once again maintained he had never murdered Miss Emma Keese. Even with only minutes remaining before his scheduled execution, he refused to confess. To the end, he insisted he was an innocent man preparing to meet God. Shortly after 8 o'clock, the prison governor entered the cell and informed Lee that the time had come. His hands were secured behind his back with leather straps, and his arms were lightly bound to prevent sudden movement. The small procession formed in silence. Leading the way was a chaplain, quietly reciting prayers from the Book of Common Prayer. Behind him walked John Lee, followed by the governor, the prison doctor, executioner James Berry, and several warders. The walk from the condemned cell to the execution shed lasted only a few moments, but for Lee, it was a final journey every condemned prisoner dreaded. The execution chamber itself was quiet. Only those required by law were allowed inside. The scaffold stood waiting beneath the heavy timber roof, illuminated by the dim morning light filtering through small windows. Barry guided Lee onto the center of the trapdoor with practiced efficiency. Leather straps were fastened around his ankles to keep his legs together during the drop. Without unnecessary ceremony, Barry drew a white hood over Lee's face, shielding him from the room and sparing the witnesses from seeing his final expression. He slipped the noose over Lee's head, carefully tightening it beneath his jaw and positioning the knot just behind his left ear like he was supposed to. Barry stepped back, gave a slight signal that everything was ready, and reached for the release lever. Every person in the room expected what happened next to last only a fraction of a second. Barry pulled the lever. Nothing happened. The trapdoor remained firmly shut beneath Lee's feet. Confusion, it spread across the scaffold. The executioner examined the mechanism while guards escorted Lee away. Officials believed some minor mechanical problem had developed, and after a brief inspection, they tested the trap without Lee standing on it. It swung open perfectly. Satisfied the fault had been corrected, they reset everything and summoned the condemned man back onto the platform. Again, Lee stood over the trap. Again, the hood covered his face. Again, the rope settled around his neck. The executioner pulled the lever like he had before. Nothing happened. The trapdoor refused to open. At this point, witnesses began exchanging nervous glances. Prison officials were bewildered. They tested the mechanism one more time with no weight on it. Once again, it functioned flawlessly. The trap snapped open exactly as designed. There appeared to be nothing wrong. For the third time, John Lee was led back onto the scaffold. Well, imagine standing there, knowing you've already survived death twice in the last few minutes. Lee reportedly remained remarkably composed while everyone around him grew increasingly shaken. The executioner positioned him over the trap one more time. The lever was pulled. Nothing happened. For the third consecutive attempt, the mechanism locked solid beneath Lee's feet. 3 failures. 3 successful tests when Lee wasn't standing there. 3 opportunities for the sentence to be carried out, and somehow the gallows refused every single one. Victorian England had never seen anything like it. Prison officials desperately examined every piece of the scaffold. Engineers later inspected the mechanism. Some believed a slight warping in the wood caused a trap to bind under certain conditions. Others argued no convincing mechanical explanation fully accounted for why it failed only when Lee was standing on it. The mystery remains debated even today among historians. There was a legal problem. English law offered no clear guidance for what should happen if an execution repeatedly failed because equipment malfunctioned. After consulting with the Home Secretary, officials made a strange and remarkable decision. Lee's death sentence would not be attempted again. Instead, it was commuted to life in prison. News of the failed execution spread across Britain with astonishing speed. Newspapers couldn't print enough copies. Many readers interpreted the event through the lens of religion. God himself, they argued, had intervened to save an innocent man. Others insisted it was merely a mechanical accident, exaggerated by sensational reporting. Spiritualists claimed unseen forces had prevented the hanging. Skeptics searched for engineering flaws. Whatever folks believed, John Lee instantly became one of the most famous prisoners in England. For more than 2 decades, Lee remained behind bars. During those years, doubts about his convictions slowly grew. Legal reformers questioned whether circumstantial evidence alone should have sent him to the gallows. Writers revisited the case, pointing out inconsistencies in the prosecution's theory. There were even alternative suspects proposed over the years, though no one could be conclusively tied to Miss Emma Key's murder. Finally, in 1907, after serving more than 25 years in prison, Lee was released. Freedom must have felt almost unreal. He had entered prison as a young man, expecting to die within just a few weeks. Instead, he walked out middle-aged, carrying one of the most famous stories in Britain. And Lee quickly embraced his unusual fame. He lectured across the country, drawing huge crowds eager to hear the first-hand accounts of the execution that failed on 3 different occasions. He published an autobiography called The Man They Could Not Hang, describing his childhood, the murder investigation, the trial, and those strange, unforgettable moments he stood on the scaffold. Audiences listened in stunned silence as he described standing beneath the noose again and again, expecting death with every pull of the lever. And then, almost as mysteriously as his execution, John Lee seemed to vanish. For decades, no one knew what had become of him. Rumors circulated he had immigrated to America under a different name. Others claimed he was living in Canada. Some believed he intentionally disappeared to escape the notoriety that had followed him his entire adult life. Eventually, his researchers uncovered what is now considered the most likely answer. Lee appears to have settled in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, under the name James Lee. He married, lived a quiet life far removed from the crowds that came to hear him speak, and he died in 1945 at the age of 80. If true, the man once led to the gallows 3 separate times ultimately lived another 60 years after his sentence was supposed to end his life. Yet one question refuses to disappear. Did the gallows malfunction because of an unfortunate mechanical defect? Did prison officials make mistakes they never fully admitted? Or did something beyond ordinary intervene that February morning? As for Miss Emma Key's murder, the mystery remains unsolved in the minds of many historians. John Lee was legally guilty, but whether he killed her is still debated nearly a century and a half later. No new evidence has ever conclusively answered the question. The only certainty is one woman lost her life, one man almost lost his 3 different times, and an ordinary prison scaffold became one of the most extraordinary stories in criminal history. And perhaps that's why the tale continues to endure. So, make sure you check out my latest book, Pistols at Red River. It's Andrew Jackson Doolan's story. It's a wild, wild tale that Hollywood couldn't make up about stuff that happened in Nashville back in 1806. And it's hard. I guess it's a love story. Andrew Jackson went to a field in Kentucky to defend his wife's honor. So, have you guys been to Monster City Madhouse yet? MonsterCityMadhouse.com. The new shirt, man, it's a whole lot of fun. Gravestone. Features a mashup of Tombstone and the Universal Monsters. This Monster City Madhouse exclusive shirt is made from a comfortable 60/40 polyester cotton blend. With quotes like, "I'm your Huckleberry," and "Hell's coming with me," you'll be ready to unleash monster justice. So MonsterCityMadhouse.com, make sure you use promo code SAVE10. That's right, promo code SAVE10, get you 10% off your order at MonsterCityMadhouse.com. And be sure to like Southern Ghost Stories on Facebook and Instagram. And also, send in your questions at southernghoststories@gmail.com for our future Q&A episode. I did one a few weeks ago, and I'll do another one here probably in early September. But yeah, questions, comments, southernghoststories@gmail.com. Thanks for listening to the show. I'm Alan Searcy, the American Historian, and I will see you guys back on Friday. If you love ghosts, cryptids, UFOs, and everything that goes bump in the night, then mark your calendars for the West Kentucky Paranormal Expo, happening September 26 in Mayfield, Kentucky at the Mayfield Graves County Fairgrounds. This incredible one-day event brings together some of the biggest names in the paranormal community, including Aaron G. Thompson from Netflix's 28 Days Haunted, Jimmy and Jeffrey from Outlaw Paranormal, The Wind of Rose, Josh Morris, Michael Huntington, Rachel Ravensville, and many, many more special guests and speakers. Your admission is just $15, and that gets you an all-day come-and-go wristband so you can explore at your own pace. Browse more than 35 vendors, enjoy delicious food trucks, attend speaker presentations and panels, meet investigators, hear incredible stories, and dive into the worlds of hauntings, cryptids, UFOs, and the unexplained. Whether you're a seasoned ghost hunter or just curious about the mysteries that surround us, there's something for everyone at the West Kentucky Paranormal Expo. Tickets are on sale now. For more information, visit West Kentucky Paranormal Expo on Facebook and get ready for one of the most exciting paranormal events of the year. We'll see you in Mayfield on September 26th. Monster City Madhouse, a year-round online store full of Halloween and classic horror shirts with an emphasis on the vintage look. Use code SAVE10 for 10% off your order. MonsterCityMadhouse.com. Free shipping and financing's available.